Good morning. If you're a Bodmin regular, it's great that you're here. If you are a visitor, it's great that you're here as well. This is about the 7th or 8th talk in a series of short talks on different psalms that I've done during the coronavirus period. They're all there on YouTube, so if you enjoy this and this is the first one you've watched, then you can find all the others on our Bodmin Road Church YouTube channel. I want to start with a little story this morning. It's the story of a man, an Irishman called Joseph Scriven. In 1842, he graduated from Trinity College in Dublin and fell head over heels in love with a girl from his hometown. They got engaged with great excitement. They planned their wedding, began to dream about their future together as husband and wife. You have to forgive my slanty glasses. I sat on them and they don't exactly sit straight. On the eve of their wedding, arrived at last. Joseph's fiancée saddled a horse to go and see him. Tragically, it was one of the last things she would ever do. A little later, Joseph saw his bride-to-be riding towards him. He grinned. But suddenly, just as she was crossing the bridge over the river, her horse bucked and threw her like a rag doll down into the river below. In blind panic, Joseph ran to the river, calling out her name. He plunged into the icy waters, but it was too late. His bride was dead. Heartbroken, Joseph emigrated to Canada, where eventually he fell in love again. In 1854, Joseph was due to marry Eliza Roche, but she fell ill and grew progressively worse. The wedding was repeatedly postponed until 3 years later, Eliza died. Joseph Scriven would never again give his heart to another. Back home in Ireland, Joseph's mother was deeply concerned for her heartbroken son, and he in turn was concerned for her. One night, Joseph penned a poem to comfort her. That poem found its way into a drawer, and some years later, a friend found it and was deeply moved. We'll return to that poem at the end. I don't know what your reaction is to a story like that. Joseph was a Christian, a believer. What do we say? God, don't you care? Once maybe, but twice to lose your beloved, your bride-to-be? I mean, that's a bit much, isn't it? Is God impotent? Can't he intervene to stop a double tragedy like that? Why is the world so full of pain? I think many of us as Christians have questions like that in our heads. But church isn't always an easy place for those questions to be expressed. We come to church and we've got to sing all things bright and beautiful, or there is power in the name of Jesus, or Jesus superhero. And sometimes I want to come to church and sing I'm really naffed off Jesus today. Why can't we have these are the days of Elijah crying in the back of a cave? Because that was part of Elijah's experience. But we tend not to sing songs like that. The vast majority of our worship is celebratory. Somebody recently did a poll on the official top 50 worship songs, and in British and American churches, only 2 of those top 50 mentioned the reality of suffering, and not one of them expressed any form of doubt. Now, at this point, you might be fearing Pastor Richard has lost it. That's not the case. You don't need to, quickly run to me with that verse from Philippians that says, "Rejoice in the Lord always," and sort me out. I am rejoicing in the Lord, but it's not unbiblical to want to be able to express some of those doubts and questions. About half of the Psalms, perhaps just under, are what we call laments. Laments which express all sorts of anguish, doubt, pain, grief and frustration to God. So in the Bible's top 150 worship songs, half of them, nearly half, do express all sorts of depths of human anguish and pain. They're honest with God. So don't get me wrong, I've no problem with our celebratory worship, but and I love to worship with celebration and praise, but there's got to be a place where we allow ourselves individually and ourselves as churches to express our difficulties too. Those lament psalms, they bristle with disgruntled prayers. Walter Brueggemann, who's an Old Testament scholar, he calls them psalms of disorientation. And sometimes in our Christian life we encounter those feelings of disorientation. Bono, the U2 singer, compares those laments to the blues. He said it's in his despair that the psalmist really reveals the nature of his special relationship with God. Honesty, even to the point of anger. And there's lots of examples. Psalm 89:46 says, "How long, O Lord? How long will you hide yourself forever?" Psalm 88, "Why, O Lord, do you reject me and hide your face from me?" Psalm 88 again, "You've put me in the lowest pit, in the darkest depths." Psalm 73, we looked at this one the other week, "Surely in vain I've kept my heart pure." What a waste of time, the psalmist says, being holy. It's not done me any good. Psalm 44, "Awake, O God, why do you sleep? Arouse yourself. Don't reject us forever. Why do you hide your face and forget our misery and our oppression?" Psalm 42, "Why have you forgotten me? Why must I go about mourning?" And, in case we've missed it in the Psalms, there's actually a whole book in the Bible called Lamentations. And in there, Jeremiah says, "He's broken my teeth with gravel. He's trampled me in the dust. My splendor is gone, and all that I hoped for from the Lord." Dashed expectations. Let's read our psalm for today. Those were just some things to whet our appetite. But our psalm for today is just one back from last time. Last time we did Psalm 23. Today I'm going back a step to Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me? So far from my words of groaning? Oh my God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer. By night, and I'm not silent. Yet you are enthroned as the Holy One. You are the praise of Israel. In you our fathers put their trust. They trusted and you delivered them. They cried to you and were saved. In you they trusted and were not disappointed. But I'm a worm, not a man, scorned by men and despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. Yet you brought me out of the womb. You made me trust in you even at my mother's breast. From birth I was cast upon you. From my mother's womb you've been my God. Do not be far from me. For trouble is near, and there's no one to help. Many bulls surround me. Strong bulls of Bashan encircle me. Roaring lions tearing their prey, open their mouths. wide against me. I'm poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart has turned to wax. It's melted away within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You lay me in the dust of death. Dogs have surrounded me. A band of evil men has encircled me. They've pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. People stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing. But you, O Lord, be not far off. O my strength, come quickly to help me. Deliver my life from the sword, my precious life from the power of dogs. Rescue me from the mouths of lions. Save me from the horns of the wild oxen. I'll let you read the rest. There's another third to that psalm, but we'll stop there. Not because there's anything wrong with the rest of it, but just for time's sake. What a brutally honest psalm. The person writing that, yes, I know they are prophesying the experience of Jesus 1,000 years later, but the person writing that is clearly going through all those experiences and struggling. Many people assume that The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe was the first of C.S. Lewis's Narnia stories, but it's not. The first in the series is The Magician's Nephew, and it tells the story of a boy called Diggory whose mother is dying. And when Diggory first meets Aslan, he asks for some magic fruit, some of Narnia's magical fruit that will make his mother well. It's a heart-rending request, but Aslan seems to ignore it. This is a little quote from the story. Diggory had been desperately hoping that the lion would say yes. He'd been horribly afraid that it might say no, but he was taken aback when it did neither. What do we do when God is just silent like that? When we pray and there's nothing, neither a yes nor a no. Lewis himself, of course, was no stranger to pain, and perhaps some of that comes out in that particular story. When he was 10, he watched his mother suffer with cancer. At one point, she recovered, as if by magic, in answer to his childhood and perhaps childlike prayers. But then she died 2 months later. So Lewis was orphaned and was dispatched to a boarding school where the headmaster was so sadistic that he was actually 2 years after Lewis arrived, was declared insane and removed from his post. Lewis wrote The Magician's Nephew during one of the happiest periods of his life, but only a few months after its publication. His wife-to-be, his fiancée, Joy, was diagnosed with cancer. And suddenly all his childhood terrors were revived. Once again, he was praying those childlike prayers for the miraculous fruit that might make her well. Joy went into remission, and during that time, Lewis and Joy were married, only for her to die just 5 years later, only 45 years old. Fresh with grief, Lewis wrote a book. It was so shocking and honest that initially it was necessary to publish it under a different name. That book is called The Grief Observed. There's a copy in the church library. And Lewis writes this. He says, "What chokes every prayer and every hope is the memory of all the prayers Joy and I offered and all the false hopes we had. Not hopes raised merely by our own wishful thinking, but hopes encouraged, even forced upon us by false diagnoses, by x-rays, by strange remissions, by one temporary recovery that might have been ranked as a miracle. Step by step we were led up the garden path." You can watch the film Shadowlands, which explores Lewis's journey. The film suggests that he lost his faith. He certainly didn't lose his faith. But he did go through a deep, deep time of immense pain and wrangling, just like the psalmist. "God, why have you forsaken me?" So many experience difficulties in their life, pain of great depth, and it's so good and so important that these psalms are here in the Bible to help us express the reality of that to God. There's a prayer I found on the internet a while ago that's just so honest that some of it can't be repeated in respectable Christian circles, but it's there on the blog site. It's a lady called Cecily. At the time she wrote it, she and her partner had been trying to start a family for 3 years. She got pregnant then through IVF, only to lose her twin boys and nearly die herself at 22 weeks. Here's a few slightly censored lines of a very honest prayer that she penned. "Dear God, I really don't know how to talk to you anymore, but I've been told that I should try. Ever since you took the boys from me, I've been on emotional lockdown. Why would I let you back into my heart when you've treated me so badly? How could you abandon me that way? This letter to you is only an exercise, an attempt to make contact. But be careful if you show up. I can scream, and scream loud, and I have a few things to say to you. If you were standing here, I'd hit you. I want to tell you to go away and leave me alone. But in truth, I want to beg you to stay. So stay here, God. Stay here. Because it hurts so much." Where is God when we hurt like that? Psalm 22 is telling us that he's been there, that he knows. Although it's written 1,000 years before Christ, it prophesies, it pictures Jesus' own experience on the cross. Yes, it's very much the psalmist's experience. He's writing from first-hand experience of suffering, but it prefigures, it foretells Jesus' own. And in case we've missed that, Jesus quotes it. As he dies, among his last words, Jesus cries out the first words of this psalm, my God, why have you forsaken me?" On the cross, Jesus Christ has tasted the very depths of our pain and grief and suffering and abandonment. And this psalm is here for us not only to encourage us in an honest to God prayer of our own, but to help us understand where God is. That he is in it with us, that he has tasted it. He's drunk the very depths of the same cup that we must drink. God has entered into our world. He's entered into our suffering. Where is God? What is God doing? God is a suffering God. Christianity is unique in its revelation of a God who has suffered with us and shares our pain. There's a book that I've recommended a few times, and I'll wave it at you again. I've not read it for a long time, but I pulled it off the shelf just recently because I've done some midweek talks on suffering, talks of a more academic nature, how we understand how there can be God and evil in the same world. How is that possible? But in the writer of this book, God on Mute, excellent book, Pete Greig, went through a terrible period of his wife struggling with disfiguring and awful seizures. And he writes of one evening in the midst of one of those seizures. He says, "One night as I sat slumped on the sofa trying to come to terms with the effects of yet another seizure, God seemed to whisper 5 words in my ear. I know how you feel." Whether or not I'd imagined the voice, I don't know, but it had an immediate impact on me. I replied angrily out loud, "No, you don't know." I was in no mood to be patronized, especially not by a God who, in my view, had just let me down once again. How can you pretend to know how I feel? If you knew how this felt, you'd stop these seizures. Tears were scalding my cheeks. When did you, God, ever see the face you love more than any other contorted demonically, blue and gasping for air? When did you ever have to sit there whispering the stupidest prayers that were ever prayed, feeling totally and utterly helpless? God, I don't think you've any idea how it feels to be one flesh with someone and to watch that person spasm and writhe as if their bones were breaking. When did you experience all that? Brushing away the tears, my gaze settled on a familiar postcard on the shelf above the fireplace, just a little to the left beneath the mirror. It was Salvador Dali's depiction of the crucifixion. God knew where I was looking because he waited a moment before whispering just 5 more words. That's how I felt then. Lewis himself made a similar discovery that God knows and shares our deepest pain. Let me read you again from The Magician's Nephew. Diggory, desperate for his mum. He dares to ask Aslan again, a second time. He thought of his mother, and he thought of the great hopes he had, and how they were all dying away, and a lump came to his throat and tears in his eyes, and he blurted out, "But please, won't you, can't you, give me something that will cure mother?" Up till then, he'd been looking at the lion's great feet and the huge, powerful claws on them. Now, in despair, he looked up at its face. What he saw surprised him as much as anything in his whole life, for the tawny face was bent down near his own, and, wonder of wonders, great shining tears stood in the lion's eyes. They were such big, bright tears compared with Diggory's own that for a moment he felt as if the lion must really be sorrier about his mother than he was himself. God does care. He cares more than we do. He cares deeply and he wants to embrace us. We'll only experience that and discover that when we're honest, when we stop pretending, when we're real with God, and when we look at the cross and understand that God has been to the very bottom of our pain. I began this morning, if you remember, with the story of Joseph Shriven, who lost a fiancée twice. And wrote a poem and stuck it in a drawer, only for somebody to find it several years later. That poem eventually was turned into a hymn. And you've just sung it this morning in the worship before this talk. Shriven wrote the words, having lost 2 fiancées to tragic circumstances. What a friend we have in Jesus. All our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear. All because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. Whatever you're going through, don't stop talking to God. He knows. He's with you. And there's a bigger tear in his eye than the one that's even in our own.